The frost is absolute. It is dawn on the Eurasian steppe, exactly 40,000 years ago. The sun barely breaches the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across a frozen expanse of crushed mammoth grass and ancient gravel. The temperature rests at -30 degrees Fahrenheit. In this deep freeze, the air itself feels heavy, biting at exposed flesh with the predatory efficiency of an apex hunter. A small band of early Homo sapiens stirs beneath an overhang of fractured limestone. This is not a dramatic cinematic sequence. This is simply a Tuesday morning in the late Pleistocene epoch. To survive here requires more than just brute strength. It demands a flawless, mathematical execution of caloric intake and thermal retention. These early humans are not primitive brutes stumbling through the snow. They are highly optimized biological machines, acting as both master thermodynamic engineers and apex ecosystem managers. Before we delve deeper into the mechanical brilliance of their daily survival, I invite you to anchor yourself to this expedition through deep time. Subscribe to this channel now and join a dedicated community exploring the raw, unfiltered biomechanics of our evolutionary history. Do not let the genius of our ancestors be forgotten to the ice. Look closely at the figures shifting in the dim morning light. The core evolutionary challenge driving these hominids is relentless. It is the inescapable thermodynamic drain of the encroaching ice age. The human body is essentially a biological furnace, operating strictly at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Drop that core temperature by just 4 degrees, and hypothermia cascades through the central nervous system. Motor functions degrade. Cognitive processing slows. Drop it by 10 degrees, and the organism experiences systemic failure. To prevent this fatal thermal deficit, their bodies are engaged in constant shivering thermogenesis, burning through immense energy reserves just to maintain baseline operations. An adult male on this frozen steppe requires upward of 5,000 kilocalories a day simply to prevent his internal water from turning to ice. Every movement, every breath, is a calculated transaction of energy. But biology alone is not enough to survive the deep freeze of the Pleistocene. They must engineer their own external environment. Observe the elder female of the group sitting near the glowing embers of last night's hearth. She is not resting. She is performing one of the most critical technological feats in the history of our species. In her calloused hands, she holds a sliver of reindeer bone. It is barely 2 inches long, polished smooth against sandstone. At one end, a microscopic hole has been meticulously drilled using a sharp piece of rotating flint. This is the bone needle. It is a masterpiece of prehistoric biomechanical engineering. Before this invention, hominids draped themselves in loose furs, tying them with crude straps. But loose furs allow for convective heat loss. Cold air slips beneath the edges, circulating over the skin and stealing warmth with every gust of wind. In -30 degrees Fahrenheit, a loose cloak is a death sentence. With the bone needle, these Homo sapiens have fundamentally altered the laws of thermodynamics. They do not merely wear animal skins. They construct highly tailored, multi-layered survival suits designed to capture and hold a microclimate of warm air directly against their biology. Consider the physics of what she is assembling. She threads the needle with processed animal sinew, a biological fiber harvested from the tendons of a reindeer. When dried and chewed, sinew separates into microscopic threads of immense tensile strength. Furthermore, sinew expands slightly when exposed to moisture, permanently sealing the puncture holes in the hide against the freezing wind. She pushes the needle through 2 layers of pelt. The inner layer consists of Arctic fox or hair, stitched with the fur facing inward, directly touching the human skin. This internal layer is the ultimate insulator. The millions of fine hairs trap a boundary layer of stagnant air. Because stagnant air is a terrible conductor of heat, The thermal energy radiating from the human body remains locked in place, unable to dissipate into the freezing environment. But insulation alone is useless if the wind can penetrate it. So, she stitches a heavy outer layer of dense reindeer hide. This outer shell is tailored with the leather facing outward. It acts as an impenetrable windbreaker, completely halting the convective flow of the freezing gales. Look at the specific tailoring of the garments worn by the hunters preparing to leave the overhang. The sleeves are tapered tight around the wrists. The hoods cinch closely around the jawline. The trousers are sewn directly into insulated foot wrappings lined with dried sedge grass. They have engineered a sealed thermal envelope. By eliminating open gaps at the neck and ankles, they prevent the chimney effect, a physical phenomenon where warm, buoyant air escapes from the top of a garment, creating a vacuum that sucks freezing air up from the bottom. This meticulously constructed microclimate is their only shield against the thermodynamic void. As the hunters gather their flint-tipped spears, checking the bindings with practiced efficiency, a subtle shift occurs in the environment. The ambient barometric pressure begins to plummet. It is a rapid, steep decline, felt deep within the synovial fluid of their joints. The local avian fauna, primarily resilient Arctic corvids, suddenly cease their morning calls and vanish into the dense pine scrub. The silence is absolute. And then, the wind changes direction. A sprawling mass of dark, bruised clouds crests the northern horizon, moving with terrifying speed. It is a massive weather front, a localized atmospheric collapse rolling off the massive continental ice sheets. The temperature drops another 15 degrees in a matter of minutes. The air turns opaque with pulverized ice crystals, whipped into a frenzy by wind gusts exceeding 60 miles per hour. This is not a simple snowfall. It is a catastrophic thermodynamic event. The wind chill factor pushes the effective ambient temperature down to fatal extremes, threatening to flash freeze exposed tissue in less than 5 minutes. The hominids instantly recognize the ecological stakes. Their foraging plans are immediately aborted. The hunters rush back to the limestone overhang, but the wind is already tearing at them, seeking structural weaknesses in their tailored garments. The physics of convective cooling are working exponentially against them. The roaring wind aggressively strips away the microscopic layers of warmth on the surface of their hide coats, threatening to penetrate the seams and shatter the fragile microclimates trapped against their skin. Every stitch of sinew, every tailored seam engineered by the elder female, is suddenly subjected to the ultimate stress test. If a single panel of hide tears, if a single hood fails to seal against the biting gale, the cold will rush in. Once the internal stagnant air is displaced by the freezing wind, cellular necrosis will begin at the extremities, followed swiftly by a catastrophic drop in core body temperature. They press themselves against the back wall of the limestone outcropping, huddling together to minimize their collective surface area and share radiant body heat. The blizzard roars outside, transforming the Eurasian steppe into an unnavigable ocean of white violence. The barometric pressure continues to crash, and the sheer velocity of the wind threatens to extinguish their smoldering hearth, their only external source of thermal energy. Will their mastery of ambient thermal regulation and their precision biological tailoring be enough to protect them, or will this sudden, brutal weather front strip away their fragile heat reserves and quietly erase this small band from the genetic record? The atmospheric collapse finally exhausts itself. The howling low-pressure system dissipates, leaving behind a heavy, static cold that settles over the terrain like a physical weight. The clan emerges from the fractured limestone, their sealed thermal envelopes performed flawlessly, preventing fatal hypothermia, but the intense shivering thermogenesis of the past 12 hours has severely depleted their internal lipid reserves. Their biological furnaces are running on absolute fumes. They require highly dense, immediate caloric fuel. The steppe offers little obvious sustenance beneath the snowpack. However, these hominids operate with a profound spatial memory of the landscape. They navigate to a specific ravine where the partially scavenged remains of a massive Mammuthus primigenius lie frozen in the permafrost. The primary muscle tissue was stripped by predators weeks ago. What remains is a skeletal architecture of immense proportions. To any other creature, these bleached bones are ecologically useless. But the hominids do not see waste. They see a hermetically sealed vault of high-density lipids. The femur of a mammoth is a pillar of thick cortical bone designed to support thousands of pounds of sheer mass. To breach it, the hunters apply targeted kinetic transfer. They wield heavy, rounded river cobbles, weighing upward of 10 pounds, lifting them high and bringing them down with maximum biomechanical force onto the exact structural weak point of the femur. The physics of the impact send microscopic fractures radiating through the calcium matrix until the massive bone violently shatters. Inside lies the prize, a thick, dense cylinder of yellow bone marrow. This is an evolutionary superfood, composed almost entirely of highly bioavailable fats and trace minerals. A single pound of this marrow contains nearly 4,000 kilocalories. It is the perfect, slow-burning fuel required to restoke their internal core temperatures. However, sustaining maximum biological efficiency on a strictly lipid and protein diet carries the risk of metabolic strain. The human organism requires complex carbohydrates to rapidly synthesize glycogen for immediate muscle exertion. To solve this, a female member of the group turns her attention to the frozen soil near the tree line. She wields a thick, curved reindeer antler, employing it as a first-class lever. By driving the tip into the permafrost and applying downward force, she mechanically fractures the ice-locked earth, unearthing the thick, fibrous roots of ancient Dioscoreae plants. These wild tubers are massive subterranean energy reserves, but they present a severe biochemical obstacle. They are loaded with naturally occurring defensive compounds, primarily toxic alkaloids. If consumed raw, these neurotoxins will bind to receptors in the human gastrointestinal tract, causing violent fluid expulsion. In a sub-zero environment, the resulting rapid dehydration would be a fatal event within hours. Watch how they overcome this botanical defense system through applied thermal processing. By placing the tubers into the glowing coals of their newly established hearth, they initiate a chemical cascade. The sustained heat fundamentally denatures the toxic proteins and breaks down the rigid, indigestible cellular walls of the plant matter. Through this meticulous thermal processing, what was once a highly poisonous root is transformed into safe, easily metabolizable glucose. They are not merely foraging, they are engaging in complex chemical extraction. But the daily logistics of survival carry a constant physical risk. While utilizing a freshly knapped piece of flint to scrape residual connective tissue from a shattered megafauna rib, one of the hunters miscalculates the angle of his strike. The frozen sinew offers unexpected resistance, and his grip slips. The heavy, razor-sharp edge of the flint deflects downward, violently impacting his exposed left forearm. The mechanical shearing force easily slices through the dermal layers, creating a deep tissue laceration. Microcapillaries and superficial veins are immediately compromised. Essential biological fluids begin to pool rapidly, contrasting starkly against the white snow. In this unforgiving ecosystem, an open laceration is an immediate countdown to systemic failure. The extreme cold does not magically sanitize trauma. It merely pauses bacterial replication. The moment the tissue is warmed by the hearth or insulated within his garments, necrotic decay will inevitably take hold. This is not an unstructured panic. The clan reacts as a highly synchronized medical unit. An older female swiftly accesses a woven fiber pouch attached to her hide belt. She withdraws a handful of dried pale green sphagnum moss gathered from the acidic bogs during the brief autumn thaw. Pay close attention to the precision of her application. This is prehistoric field trauma logistics in real time. She presses the dense biological material directly into the open laceration. Sphagnum possesses an extraordinary cellular structure, capable of absorbing more than 20 times its dry weight in fluid. It immediately draws in the pooling liquids, creating a mechanical plug that facilitates rapid coagulation. But the true genius of this intervention is entirely chemical. The moss naturally maintains a highly acidic potential of hydrogen level and is heavily saturated with complex phenolic compounds. As it sits inside the wound, it actively alters the localized biochemical environment, dropping the potential of hydrogen to a level that is deeply hostile to bacterial colonization. They are neutralizing the threat of sepsis through applied botany. The immediate threat of infection is stalled, but the blunt force of the strike has triggered a massive localized inflammatory cascade. Histamines are flooding the trauma site. Swelling threatens to compress the underlying nerves, potentially cutting off distal motor function to the hunter's fingers. Without the precise articulation of his left hand, his ability to craft tools and hurl weapons drops to zero. He would become an ecological liability. To counter this internal physiological response, the elder provides him with a strip of inner bark peeled from a salix tree, an ancient species of willow. The hunter places the bark between his molars and begins to rhythmically chew. He is not consuming this for caloric gain. He is extracting prehistoric pharmacology. His salivary enzymes immediately begin breaking down the fibrous plant matter, leaching out a bitter, active compound known as salicin. As he swallows the fluid, his liver processes the salicin, metabolizing it into salicylic acid. This is the precise biochemical foundation of modern synthesized aspirin. Within 40 minutes, the salicylic acid crosses the blood-brain barrier, effectively intercepting pain receptor signals while simultaneously suppressing the localized swelling in his forearm. Using only the raw organic architecture of the step, they have successfully stabilized a severe trauma event. The medical intervention holds, but the sequence of events has triggered a secondary, far more immediate ecological threat. The distinct olfactory signature of the trauma, the iron-heavy scent of compromised biological fluids, has vaporized into the ultra-dry, freezing air. It is invisible, yet it drifts steadily downwind across the crushed mammoth grass, carried by the thermals of the descending dusk. In the late Pleistocene, the wind serves as a highly efficient broadcast system for apex predators. A biological timer has engaged. As the pale sun dips below the horizon and the deep shadows swallow the steppe, a low, rhythmic sequence of harmonic vocalizations ripples through the dense pine tree line. A highly organized pack of social hunters, possessing olfactory receptors thousands of times more sensitive than a human, has locked onto the precise chemical signature of the injured hominid. Will the clan's intricate botanical medicine and thermal engineering be enough to ward off the encroaching dark, or has the microscopic scent of the wound already sealed their fate against the pack of apex scavengers now calculating their approach from the absolute edge of the firelight? The invisible chemical beacon released by the trauma event has drifted steadily across the frozen steppe. As the deep black of the Pleistocene night swallows the landscape, a localized ecosystem of scavengers and opportunistic predators naturally responds to the scent. Look at the absolute edge of the firelight. Drifting silently between the skeletal trunks of the ancient pine trees are the shifting silhouettes of Canis lupus, the gray wolf. These are not the aggressive, hyper-territorial apex hunters you might expect to immediately storm the camp. These specific individuals belong to an isolated, localized population that has slowly adapted to the presence of Homo sapiens. They linger precisely at the boundary, where the thermal radiation of the campfire dissipates into the freezing air. To understand what is happening here beneath the limestone overhang, you must understand the severe biological limitations of the human organism. We are fundamentally diurnal creatures. Our primary mechanism for processing environmental data is vision, specifically adapted for daylight. The moment the sun drops below the horizon, our biological hardware is immediately compromised. In the absolute darkness of the prehistoric steppe, a human is functionally blind. Furthermore, our auxiliary sensory systems are tragically inadequate for night survival. A human possesses roughly 6 million olfactory receptors within our nasal cavity. We can detect strong, immediate odors, but we cannot map our spatial environment through scent. Our auditory range is similarly limited, specifically tuned to the frequencies of human speech rather than the stealthy rustle of a predator moving through crushed snow. In the dark, early humans are ecologically highly vulnerable. Now, consider the biological machinery of Canis lupus. A wolf possesses over 250 million olfactory receptors, but their advantage is not just in raw numbers, it is structural. Observe the deep, elongated architecture of the canine snout. When a wolf inhales, a specialized fold of tissue actually separates the airflow into two distinct pathways. One path leads directly to the lungs for respiration. The other path routes air through a labyrinth of bony structures called ethmoturbinates, which are specifically dedicated to trapping and analyzing microscopic odor molecules. A wolf does not just smell a scent, it processes a three-dimensional chemical map of the surrounding terrain, capable of identifying the exact direction, distance, and decay rate of a biological source. Their auditory engineering is equally devastating. A wolf possesses 18 distinct muscles in their pinnae, the external ear flaps, allowing them to independently rotate each ear 180 degrees. They serve as parabolic microphones, continuously scanning the brush to lock onto the precise high-frequency acoustic signatures of snapping twigs or compressing snow from over a mile away. These early humans are acutely aware of their own sensory deficit. To survive the deep time of the Pleistocene, they do not attempt to evolve new senses. Instead, they engage in one of the most profound technological leaps in the history of our planet. They outsource their sensory processing to another species. They are engineering a cross-species mutualism. Watch the careful, deliberate interaction unfolding near the hearth. This is the slow, mechanical engine of early domestication in real time. It is not driven by affection. It is driven strictly by ecological logic and caloric efficiency. The hominids possess a surplus of low-grade biological material from their earlier foraging. They have stripped the highly bioavailable lipids, leaving behind shards of thick cortical bone and dense, rubbery connective cartilage. For a human jaw, attempting to mechanically break down these dense remnants requires a massive expenditure of caloric energy for a virtually non-existent nutritional return. For humans, it is waste. But for a member of Canis lupus, equipped with specialized carnassial teeth and a jaw capable of delivering a bite force exceeding 400 pounds per square inch, these scraps are highly valuable, easily processed fuel. An adult hunter, maintaining a low, non-threatening posture, physically tosses a heavy splinter of marrow-depleted bone into the snow just beyond the firelight. The immediate reaction of a wild animal should be a heightened stress response. The physiological concept of flight distance dictates the exact proximity an animal will tolerate before its adrenal glands dump epinephrine into its bloodstream, forcing an immediate retreat. However, natural genetic variation exists within this local wolf population. A small subset of these wolves possesses a naturally lower baseline of cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Their neurological fear response is slightly suppressed, allowing their caloric drive to override their instinct to flee. A heavy, thick-furred male steps out of the shadow. He does not break eye contact with the hominid. He lowers his massive skull, quickly clamping his jaws around the discarded bone fragment, and retreating exactly 3 paces back into the dim periphery to consume it. A thermodynamic trade has just occurred. The hominids have exchanged useless organic waste for access to the greatest biological sensor array on the Eurasian continent. By repeatedly offering these low-cost nutritional subsidies, the humans are engaging in precise behavioral conditioning. They are anchoring the wolves to the immediate vicinity of the camp. The campfires serve as the nucleus, and the lingering wolves inherently establish a massive, highly sensitive perimeter defense. The ecological benefits of this biological engineering are immediate and profound. As the wolves circle the camp, investigating the dark margins of the tree line, their presence fundamentally alters the hominid's spatial awareness. The humans no longer need to peer blindly into the dark. They simply watch the wolves. If the wolves are relaxed, lying in the snow with their heavy tails curled over their snouts for thermal retention, the humans know with absolute certainty that the immediate environment is secure. This allows the hominids to dramatically lower their own physiological stress responses. They transition their autonomic nervous systems from the hypervigilant sympathetic state, characterized by elevated heart rates and constant muscular tension, into a relaxed parasympathetic state. This internal neurological shift is critical. It allows their biological furnaces to direct energy away from muscle readiness and entirely towards cellular repair and optimal digestion of their heavy lipid meals. Through this symbiosis, the Homo sapiens have effectively expanded their sensory footprint by miles in every direction, expending almost zero metabolic energy to maintain it. They have integrated the canine auditory and olfactory networks directly into their own survival strategy. As the night deepens, the temperature plummets further, and the wind dies down to a dead calm. The silence of the frozen steppe becomes absolute, amplifying the slightest acoustic disturbance. The humans are resting close to the hearth, their thermal garments sealed against the cold. But suddenly, the intricate warning system they have cultivated engages. At the very edge of the sensory perimeter, the large male wolf abruptly stops chewing a discarded fragment of cartilage. His entire biological machine locks into a state of maximum tension. His parabolic ears swivel in perfect synchronization, pointing directly toward the dense, impenetrable shadows of the northern tree line. A complex chemical signature has just washed over the wolf's ethmoturbinates. It is not the familiar scent of a foraging herbivore. It is the heavy, musky, unmistakable biological exhaust of an apex predator. The wolf's posture shifts violently. The dense guard hairs along his spine involuntarily erect, a biological phenomenon known as piloerection, designed to make his silhouette appear significantly larger. He lowers his heavily muscled neck, and a deep, low-frequency acoustic vibration begins to rumble within his chest cavity. It is a sustained, harmonic growl that cuts directly through the stillness of the camp. Instantly, the other wolves flanking the perimeter rise, their own ears locking onto the identical vector. They mirror the dominant male's aggressive stance, emitting a chorus of low, percussive warning vocalizations. The hominids react instantly. Their parasympathetic relaxation is immediately shattered by an explosive surge of adrenaline. The hunters grab their heavy flint-tipped spears from the frozen ground, their eyes scanning the darkness where the wolves are intensely focused. The canine early warning system has given them a precious 40-second head start to organize their physical defense, an evolutionary advantage that likely separates them from immediate ecological elimination. The humans cannot smell the approaching threat. They cannot hear its footfalls compressing the deep snowpack. But the wolves are holding the line, barking fiercely into the pitch black of the ancient forest. The sheer mass required to displace the air and crack the heavy timber in the distance indicates an organism of terrifying scale and biomechanical power. As the warning growls of the newly integrated wolves ripple through the camp, what massive, unseen Pleistocene terror is stalking them from the dense tree line? The dark tree line shatters. The sheer biological mass that violently displaces the ancient pine branches is staggering. The hominids are suddenly face to face with Ursus spelaeus, the legendary Pleistocene cave bear. A mature male of this species weighs well over 2,000 pounds and stands nearly 10 feet tall when resting on his hind legs. He is a heavily armored engine of muscle, thick guard hairs, and immense skeletal density, driven out of his winter torpor by the sudden collapse of the barometric pressure and the desperate need for caloric intake. He is not here to hunt the humans. He is here to dominate their geographical location, to claim the residual warmth of their hearth and consume their processed lipid reserves. Against an organism of this scale, human biomechanics are hopelessly outmatched. A direct physical grapple is a 0% survival scenario. The bear possesses a structural bite force capable of crushing a hominid skull like a dry gourd, and his forelimbs can deliver massive blunt force trauma that would instantly shatter a human rib cage. But these early humans do not rely on raw muscular output. They rely on localized physics. Watch the primary hunter step forward, placing himself between the advancing Ursus spelaeus and the sheltering overhang. He does not hold his heavy spear. Instead, he raises a specialized 2-foot length of carved reindeer antler with a distinct carved hook at the distal end. This is the atlatl. It is a prehistoric kinetic amplifier, and its invention represents a monumental leap in weaponized biomechanics. To throw a spear using only the human arm heavily restricts velocity. The shoulder, elbow, and wrist joints can only generate a maximum rotational speed of roughly 40 miles per hour. At that speed, a wooden shaft would simply bounce off the thick pelt and dense subcutaneous fat of the cave bear. The atlatl fundamentally alters this equation by acting as an artificial extension of the human arm. It literally adds an entirely new pivot point to the hunter's anatomical kinetic chain. The hunter fits the hook of the antler perfectly into a small dimple at the back of a specialized 6-foot-long wooden dart. As the massive bear lunges forward, closing the distance rapidly, the hunter initiates the launch sequence. He steps into the throw, driving his core weight forward. His shoulder fires, then his elbow, then his wrist, transferring energy in a perfect sequential wave. The atlatl acts as a first-class lever, dramatically multiplying the angular momentum of his arm. Look closely at the mechanics of the projectile itself. The dart is not rigid. It is specifically carved from highly flexible sapling wood. As the hunter sweeps the atlatl forward, the massive acceleration forces the back of the dart to move faster than the front. The wooden shaft physically bends under the sheer mechanical stress, bowing outward and compressing like a loaded biological spring. It stores immense potential kinetic energy. The moment the dart releases from the hook, it violently snaps completely straight. This physical phenomenon converts all of the stored potential energy into forward kinetic thrust, a principle known in fluid dynamics and ballistics as the archer's paradox. The projectile leaves the atlatl at a staggering velocity, exceeding 100 miles per hour. It is fletched at the rear with stiff avian flight feathers, which immediately impart a rapid spin, utilizing gyroscopic stability to prevent the weapon from tumbling through the freezing air. At the front of the dart sits a precision-napped piece of chert, engineered to a molecular edge. The impact is devastating. With armor-piercing velocity, the specialized geometry of the stone tip easily bypasses the thick guard hairs, shears directly through 4 inches of dense thermal fat, and slips perfectly between the heavy ribs of the Ursus spelaeus. The projectile breaches the thoracic cavity, immediately compromising the predator's vital cardiopulmonary network. The immense bear halts its charge instantly. A massive drop in internal hydrostatic pressure cascades through its system. Its highly evolved neurological network instantly calculates that the caloric and biological cost of this engagement has become catastrophic. It issues a deep, guttural exhalation and heavily turns away, retreating back into the dense black timber where its physiological systems will quietly shut down in the snowpack. The immediate biological threat is neutralized, but there is zero time for a parasympathetic reset. The environment itself is about to initiate a lethal assault. The drop in barometric pressure that awoke the bear finally manifests into physical reality. A catastrophic meteorological collapse descends upon the Eurasian steppe. The wind direction abruptly violently shifts, blowing directly into the open face of their limestone overhang. Within 20 minutes, the ambient air temperature plummets to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Pulverized ice is driven sideways by gale-force winds, easily penetrating their shallow shelter. The tailored thermal garments they engineered are incredible, but they are designed to retain heat against a functioning biological furnace. If the hominids remain static in this extreme sub-zero wind tunnel, convective heat loss will aggressively strip away their core temperatures. They will freeze solid before dawn. They must alter their geological positioning immediately. The clan abandons the shallow overhang, navigating blindly through the whiteout conditions by relying strictly on their deep spatial memory of the local topography. They push a mile up a steep scree slope, fighting the intense drag of the deep snowpack until they reach a massive, gaping fissure in the side of a limestone mountain. They do not just step inside, they descend. They navigate deep into a sprawling, twisting subterranean karst cave network, pushing hundreds of yards past the twilight zone and into absolute, lightless isolation. Down here, isolated from the chaotic atmospheric physics of the surface, the environment stabilizes. The dense limestone acts as a massive geological insulator. Regardless of the lethal -50 degrees raging outside, the ambient air temperature deep within the cave system hovers constantly around 52 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained by the geothermal baseline of the Earth itself. It is a crucial improvement, but 52 degrees in total darkness will still slowly drain their internal lipid reserves over a matter of days. They must synthesize external heat. They must build a fire. However, lighting a fire inside a sealed subterranean chamber introduces a terrifying new ecological hazard: carbon monoxide poisoning and particulate asphyxiation. A localized fire produces massive volumes of toxic smoke. If that smoke is trapped within the cavern roof, it will slowly descend, displacing the oxygen. The hominids would simply fall unconscious and quietly cease respiration. It is a silent, invisible threat. To survive the winter siege, they must become master fluid dynamics engineers. Observe the elder female holding a single tuft of dry rabbit fur between her fingers. She stands perfectly still in the pitch black, letting the tuft dangle. She is not resting. She is meticulously reading the microcurrents of the cave's internal atmosphere. Even deep underground, subtle shifts in air pressure create highly predictable drafting patterns. She watches the fur gently sway toward a specific, natural fissure in the jagged ceiling. She has located an active geological exhaust flue. Directly beneath this fissure, the clan begins to construct a highly specialized subterranean hearth. They do not place their dry timber directly onto the cave floor. Instead, they construct a raised lattice of flat river stones, elevating the fuel source roughly 8 inches off the damp ground. This specific architecture allows heavy, cold, oxygen-rich air that naturally pools at the bottom of the cavern to flow cleanly underneath the fire, feeding the combustion sequence from the base upward. As the friction drill ignites the dry tinder and the flames catch the larger timber, a localized thermodynamic engine roars to life. The intense heat creates a rapid thermal column. Because hot air is significantly less dense than cold air, the exhaust gases accelerate violently upward in a tight, concentrated pillar. This rising column catches the natural draft of the ceiling fissure, creating a powerful chimney effect. The toxic particulate matter and carbon monoxide are efficiently exported out of the living space and vented up through the mountain, leaving the breathing air near the cave floor perfectly pristine. Simultaneously, the intense radiant energy from the smokeless fire is aggressively absorbed by the surrounding limestone walls. The specific heat capacity of the rock captures the thermal output, storing it and radiating it back inward in a steady, unbroken wave of ambient warmth. The chamber effectively transforms into a massive, self-sustaining thermal battery. Outside, the catastrophic blizzard completely buries the entrance to the cave network under tons of packed drift ice, effectively sealing them inside. They are physically entombed in the mountain, safe from apex scavengers and insulated against the fatal cold of the Pleistocene winter. As the clan gathers around the glowing, perfectly ventilated hearth, their immediate physiological struggle for caloric fuel and thermal retention pauses. Their biological furnaces are stable. But this extended period of subterranean isolation triggers a profoundly different evolutionary imperative. Deep in the absolute dark, with their survival secured and their metabolisms resting, the human brain demands complex stimulation. As the flickering orange light dances across the blank, sweeping canvases of the deep limestone walls, a monumental neurobiological shift is about to occur. What unprecedented leap into geometric symbolism and acoustic engineering are they preparing to unleash in the silence of the deep earth? The acoustic isolation of the subterranean karst network is absolute. Hundreds of feet beneath the frozen surface of the Eurasian steppe, the howling gale of the catastrophic blizzard is reduced to a microscopic, indistinguishable vibration within the millions of tons of solid rock above them. Inside the deep chamber, the fluid dynamics of their elevated geological exhaust perform flawlessly. The toxic particulate matter is seamlessly vented upward, while radiant heat from the smokeless fire bounces continuously off the dense limestone geometry. The clan is physically secure. Their internal core temperatures are perfectly stable, and their lipid reserves are actively rebuilding. But this specific environment triggers an entirely new, deeply complex evolutionary imperative. Deprived of the vast visual and auditory data of the open tundra, the human central nervous system experiences acute sensory deprivation. The brain of an early Homo sapiens is a massive, calorically expensive biological supercomputer. It demands constant, relentless input. When the external environment goes completely dark and the immediate physiological struggle for survival pauses, the prefrontal cortex does not shut down. It simply turns its immense processing power inward. Look at the adult male sitting just beyond the immediate glare of the firelight. He holds the pale, dried radius bone of an enormous cygnus, an ancient species of massive, extinct swan. Avian skeletal architecture is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. To achieve the sheer biomechanical lift required for flight, a bird's bones must be strictly pneumatic. They are essentially hollow biological tubes, internally reinforced by a microscopic, crisscrossing honeycomb matrix of calcium. This creates maximum structural integrity with virtually zero mass. The hunter utilizes a highly specialized chisel-like stone tool known as a flint baron. With deliberate, microscopic strokes, he carefully strips away the internal calcium webbing. He is not making a weapon. He is engineering a hollow acoustic chamber. With absolute mathematical precision, he bores 3 distinct circular apertures along the dorsal ridge of the bone, measuring the distance between the holes using the rigid width of his own thumb. He lifts the modified biological instrument to his lips and directs a focused, high-pressure stream of exhaled air directly across the sharp edge of the primary opening. The physical mechanics of sound are instantly manipulated. The fluid dynamics of his breath split against the hard edge of the bone, creating a rapidly oscillating vortex of air pressure inside the hollow shaft. A clear, piercing harmonic frequency erupts into the silent cavern. The acoustic energy expands in a three-dimensional wave, traveling outward until it violently impacts the dense, irregular limestone walls. Because the rock is heavily compacted and non-porous, it does not absorb the sound. It reflects it backward. The cavern geometry acts as a massive physical amplifier, catching the primary notes and layering them with deep, resonant, overlapping echoes. He begins to play a complex rhythmic sequence. Other members of the clan intuitively respond, striking heavy lengths of dried mammoth bone against the solid stone floor in perfect synchronization. This is not idle entertainment. It is a profound neurobiological mechanism. The shared auditory rhythm actively synchronizes the neural oscillations across the entire group. Their individual brainwaves literally begin to align to the identical frequency. This shared sensory experience triggers a massive, localized release of oxytocin and dopamine within their central nervous systems. It chemically neutralizes the lingering cortisol from their previous predator encounter, actively binding the hominids into an unbreakable social matrix. They are utilizing acoustic engineering to solidify tribal cohesion and lower the collective metabolic stress of the clan. While this acoustic resonance saturates the chamber, a deeper leap into cognitive permanence is unfolding against the sweeping back wall. A younger female crouches beside a flat slab of shale. She holds a heavy nodule of deep red hematite, a naturally occurring iron oxide harvested from a dried riverbed miles away. Using a heavy, rounded river cobble, she aggressively grinds the dense mineral against the shale, slowly reducing the iron oxide into a pile of microscopic red powder. Dry mineral powder will not adhere permanently to a vertical rock face. To make it stick, she must engineer a viable chemical binder. She turns to a small, hollowed-out section of reindeer skull resting near the hearth. Inside is a pool of highly refined lipid fuel, strictly processed from the abdominal fat of a Pleistocene herbivore. She meticulously mixes the melted animal fat with the pulverized hematite, utilizing the ambient heat of the fire to maintain its low viscosity. Through complex chemical synthesis, she has successfully created the first true geological paint. She approaches the bare limestone face. She takes a mouthful of the red liquid. Placing her left hand completely flat against the cold stone surface, she presses her lips tightly together and forcefully exhales the pigment over the back of her hand. She is utilizing the explosive pneumatic pressure of her own lungs to atomize the thick liquid into a fine chemical aerosol spray. When she pulls her hand away, a perfect, negative biological impression remains permanently etched in deep red iron oxide. It is an absolute, undeniable declaration of cognitive existence. But she does not stop at a simple physiological imprint. Dipping a specialized brush crafted from stiff badger hair tied securely to a splinter of wood, she begins to apply swift, deliberate strokes across the cavern ceiling. She outlines the massive, heavily humped silhouette of Bison priscus, the extinct steppe bison. Next to it, she renders the distinct, elongated muscular neck of Equus ferus, the wild horse. This sprawling mural is not mere interior decoration. You are witnessing the invention of an external hard drive. The human brain, for all its immense processing power, possesses a finite capacity for exact memory retention over decades. By rendering the precise anatomical dimensions, the herd structures, and the distinct seasonal behaviors of these apex herbivores onto the permanent canvas of the cave, the clan is physically encoding vital survival data. Look closely at the lower abdomen of the painted Bison priscus. She adds a series of precise, parallel red lines directly over the location of the animal's massive cardiopulmonary system. She is visually mapping the optimal biomechanical strike zone for their atlatl darts. Beside the herd, she paints a geometric sequence of 28 small red dots. This correlates directly to the lunar cycle, creating a permanent chronological calendar that tracks the precise timeline of the vital spring ungulate migrations. They are offloading complex ecological algorithms from their fragile biological memories into the indestructible memory of the mountain itself. This neurobiological leap into abstract symbolic expression fundamentally separates Homo sapiens from every other organism on the planet. The isolated wolves patrolling the perimeter outside the cavern cannot pass down complex generational knowledge of migration routes beyond what they physically show their current pups. The massive Ursus spelaeus, sleeping in the adjacent valley, cannot analyze its past territorial encounters to engineer better physical defenses. But the hominids can. They have created a shared internal cognitive reality that persists long after the individual members of the clan inevitably perish. Weeks pass slowly within the subterranean warmth. The brutal kinetic violence of the winter siege slowly expends its localized energy above ground. The heavy, packed ice completely blocking the cave entrance begins to structurally thin, eventually admitting a faint, pale beam of refracted sunlight into the deep dark. The barometric pressure finally stabilizes. The long night is breaking. When the clan finally pushes through the melting drifts and steps back onto the thawed Eurasian steppe, they are not stepping out as mere survivors of a catastrophic weather event. They emerge as an apex biological network. The local populations of archaic hominids that lacked their advanced thermal tailoring and acoustic social engineering have already succumbed quietly to the freezing void. The giant, heavy scavengers that failed to secure sufficient lipid reserves lie frozen beneath the thawing mud of the new spring. The ecosystem has been ruthlessly purged by the thermodynamic crucible of the late Pleistocene. But this specific biological lineage persists. Having engineered their own microclimates, mastered complex cross-species mutualism with Canis lupus, manipulated fluid dynamics to harness the power of fire underground, and achieved true cognitive permanence, they successfully slip through an evolutionary bottleneck that ecologically eradicates 90% of the continental megafauna. They are no longer simply reacting to the harsh, unyielding parameters of the natural world. They are fundamentally rewriting them. As the dawn of a new, warmer epoch slowly begins to rise over the ancient gravel, this small, resilient band of relentless biological engineers secures their absolute genetic legacy, marching forward directly across the thawing earth as the sole surviving architects of the planet.